Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about patient-powered research registries. I spent the past 18 months serving on the executive committee and steering committees of PCORNet, which is PCORI's big data project. One of the things PCORNet did was fund 18 patient-powered research projects using patient registries. I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of LymeDisease.org, and we're in the process of launching a patient data registry, which actually will be part of one of PCORNet's patient-powered research projects. I'm going to talk about patient registries, mainly through the lens of LymeDisease.org. Are they worth the time and bother? And are they more hope or hype? But before I do that, I'm going to talk about the concept of participatory science and patient-powered research generally. So this chart is of levels of participatory science engagement. It's a lot like Arnstein's ladder of public participation, reflecting increasing levels of engagement as you move up the chart. Increasing levels of public engagement in science, sometimes called citizen science, is a trend that is going on generally. Technological advances are permitting a form of democratization of science and research not attainable before. In research, we might look at the levels as beginning with patients as research subjects, moving up to interpreters, for instance in Cochrane plain language summaries, to patient engagement, perhaps sitting on a panel, and ultimately to the highest level of engagement we have, patients as drivers or partners in research projects. And what do we mean when we talk about patient-powered research? Traditional research is expert-centered, focusing on the questions and curiosities of the researchers themselves. These questions may have little relevance to patients. For example, in Lyme disease, there are no patients on any government advisory panel for Lyme research. The outcomes patients considered important are not being measured. There is no sense of urgency in the mission. So if patient-centered research puts patients at the center, why would we do this? Because patients have a deep knowledge of the condition, they have more reason to get it right, and they are more motivated to be dogged in the pursuit of their interests. One reason patients are getting more involved in research is that patients are becoming very impatient. So let me talk about that a minute, about becoming impatient by sharing a personal story. So some of you know that I am what is known as a reluctant volunteer, someone who contracted Lyme disease from the bite of a tick. Actually, I contracted Lyme disease and 2 other tick-borne co-infections because in addition to Lyme, ticks carry a number of other serious pathogens. In my case, it took 5 years, 7 doctors, and endless tests to be diagnosed, and 2 more years of intensive treatment to become well. I lost my career, and my family lost a mother and wife, as well as a spark literally went out of my life. Tests for Lyme disease are too insensitive to tell who has active infection, who has past infection, and whether treatment is being effective. So this SPECT scan shows my darkened brain before treatment and my remarkably brighter brain 2 years after treatment. And I know it's an anecdote, but to me personally, it's a very persuasive anecdote. I became involved with Lyme to make sure that people did not go through what I did. Getting diagnosed and treated for this disease should not take 5 years of misdiagnosis and should not sideline people's lives. So fast forward 10 years, and these are the types of responses we get to open-ended questions on our surveys. And our surveys typically draw over 9,000 patients. And this one is from a few months ago. So as you can see, nothing has changed. We haven't moved the needle on this disease. We are failing miserably. We aren't diagnosing it quickly. We don't know the optimum treatment protocol. Far too many patients are remaining ill as suboptimal care is becoming standardized in guidelines and harming patients. Patients have a very poor quality of life. In our survey, most have had to quit or cut back on work or school at some point, and the number of ill is rising. Just recently, the CDC revised its case numbers upward tenfold, recognizing that it's not 30,000 cases a year, which is like a rare disease, but rather that over 300,000 people contract Lyme disease in the United States each year. That's 6 times more annual cases than HIV/AIDS and almost twice as many as breast cancer. Many people with Lyme disease stay sick for years, yet there has been little research on how to help people recover from the illness. How little research? Well, this slide shows the number of randomized controlled trials for different diseases, and you see that while other diseases have a relatively robust research base, Lyme disease has had only 3 randomized controlled treatment trials funded by the NIH and none funded by pharma. So we really are a research disadvantaged disease. No pharma interest in studying generic antibiotics for relatively short-term use. What we don't know about Lyme disease vastly exceeds what we do know, and really, half of our struggle is that no one is asking. At a congressional hearing a few years back, Congressman Chris Smith referred to the last 10 years of research in Lyme disease as the lost decade. During that period, only 3 treatment trials were published. None improved patient quality of life. All involved exquisitely small sample sizes in a population that is known to be highly heterogeneous. Samples were highly selective. On the right side of this slide is the selection process of one NIH researcher who screened over 3,300 patients to enroll just 20 in his treatment trial. That's less than 1% of those who applied. And this trial is typical. It took 4 years to recruit and 7 years to publication. It has been 10 years since the NIH trial recruited its last patient. The point is that if you want answers that will restore health to regular patients that clinicians see, you can't get there from here. So about the same time that the NIH finished recruiting its last trial, LymeDisease.org started conducting patient surveys. 10 years ago, the survey tools were rudimentary. Our survey was distributed by paper through physician offices. In 1 year, we collected only 100 surveys. A year later, we published them in our newsletter. SurveyMonkey enters the scene 5 years later, and we collect 4,100 responses in really no time. That's what an advance in technology can do. Our results were peer-reviewed and published in Health Policy. What we found out was that patients didn't need to wait for research that may never come. We could start leading the charge with some of the tools we had to get the answers we desperately need. And one of the things that we found in our surveys was that the majority of patients who responded with chronic Lyme disease reported co-infections. All of the NIH trials exclude people with co-infections. We think this means that we need large, robust sample sizes to permit subgroup analysis. And when we talk about sample in Lyme disease, a good question is, what are we talking about? We don't have good biomarkers, and we don't know the spectrum of the disease, what the normal distribution looks like. CDC surveillance differs from clinical diagnosis. CDC surveillance only captures 1 in 10 cases, but we don't know that the 1 in 10 that they capture are representative of the other 9 that they don't. The point of this slide is that when we draw a sample population in Lyme disease, we don't really know where it fits on the spectrum of the disease. And different sample populations, for example, those in RCTs, those responding to surveys, those included in insurance databases, may have little in common. When the CDC revised its numbers from 30,000 to 300,000, a 10-fold increase, they relied on 3 studies using different data sources: insurance claims data, a public survey, and laboratory test data. And this use of different sources of data is probably quite important. Our second survey, published in PureJ last year, asked standard government questions from the National Health Inventory Survey and CDC Healthy Days. Among other things, it revealed high healthcare utilization rates in patients with chronic Lyme disease. Our respondents are self-selected, so this isn't a random sample of Lyme patients, it's a piece of the puzzle. However, a recent study out of Johns Hopkins, looking at 52,000 cases of Lyme disease using an insurance database, so a very different sample, came to a similar conclusion regarding increased healthcare utilization. Here we have two different data sources confirming the same thing. So next month, LymeDisease.org is building on our past 10 years of survey experience and launching a patient data registry, My Lyme Data. And this is from our explainer video for patients. Can one person have power? 10, 100, 10,000? The idea being that there is power in numbers, that big data matters. Surveys measure a point in time, but registries allow longitudinal data that lets you look at questions like, what is the progression of the disease? The AHRQ puts out a guide for patient registries, and here are some of the advantages they say that patient registries provide, and you will see that most of these have been problems in Lyme treatment studies to date. So patient registries allow you to enroll heterogeneous patient populations. They allow you to evaluate care as is actually provided, and they allow you to assess complex treatment patterns and treatment combinations. They also offer the ability to evaluate patient outcomes when clinical trials are not practical or difficult to conduct, such as long-term trials. So looking at the bottom two bullets, the NIH looked at 90 days of treatment for Lyme disease using a single antibiotic at a time and called this long-term treatment. But most patients and physicians who treat them do not consider 90 days of treatment to be long-term. They think that this infection is more like tuberculosis than strep throat, requiring longer treatments, more like 2 years, using combination antimicrobial therapy. The NIH has never conducted long-term treatment trials like these. They are complex and they would be difficult to conduct. We believe that a patient registry could help fill this information gap. So what else can patient registries do? Well, let's take a step back to the future. They can become part of a broader collaborative research strategy. And how might that look? Descriptive information from patient registries, hypothesis generation, research-ready populations, recruitment for patient-centered studies, patient-initiated RCTs, the potential for long-term follow-up after clinical trials, and dissemination. So in conclusion, let me circle back to our panel question. How do we ensure that research is rigorous and reduces waste? We need patient engagement to ensure that research questions asked are the right questions. We need patients to create a patient-centered research community. We need to avoid lost decades. And we need to make sure that we use all available data sources when we address complex problems. Patient-powered research registries. Are they more hope or hype? At LymeDisease.org, we're hoping they become one of the research tools in the arsenal. And we'll be launching My Lyme Data in September. I encourage you to stop by and check it out. Thank you for your time.